Hi everybody, thank you so much for coming. I'm honored that you would come hear me speak. I went on Facebook a couple of weeks ago and we were trying to figure out, Blair and I were trying to figure out how to hook up a Mac to the screen and all that stuff. And so I went on Facebook and I said, I'm giving a talk up at UCSB. Does anybody, and I don't even know the terms, but does anybody have something that I can use? And a friend of mine said, are you a gaucho? And I said, what? And then it dawned on me and I said, oh, no, I guess I answered your question by saying, what? I have no idea what you're talking about. So now I know. So thank you for having me here. I guess the first question was, how did I get into the business, the entertainment business, specifically the movie business? And I figured that probably the most appropriate way was to do something in screenplay form. Don't worry, it's not 115 pages, it's just one page. But this was spring of 1990, interior dorm room day, a hopelessly disheveled, disorganized common room. Chris, 23, Guns N' Roses t-shirt, feathered mullet, slightly puffy from too many keg parties, sits on the couch watching television. Through the room strides Duff, Chris's 6'7" roommate, dressed as a suit. He's on his way out. Chris, disinterested. Which one is it today? Duff crossing by. Goldman Sachs. Chris, good luck. Duff leaves. Chris watches the television. Angle on the TV. A show called The Wonder Years is on. Interior, oh well, I missed a section down here, but Chris leans in, gets an idea, a spark of inspiration. Interior dining hall night. Chris writes furiously in a notebook while other students study for final exams. He pauses to look out the window, deep in thought, then smiles and begins writing again. So that was the spark of inspiration. Basically, all my roommates were going on interviews with investment banks, and like an idiot, I said, I don't want to do that. If I had done that, I probably would be financing movies now. But I knew I wanted to be involved in storytelling in some capacity, and that's a short version of basically what happened. I was watching a show called The Wonder Years, and it just kind of dawned on me that there is an industry that makes these movies and television shows that I love so much, that I've loved since I was a kid. There weren't a lot of resources back in those days, but I just kind of thought this is what I want to do, and so I went to write for a travel guide called Let's Go. Had a route in the Western Canada and the Pacific Northwest that I knew would bring me down to Los Angeles. So in August of 1990, I arrived in Los Angeles with these two items. And if you don't recognize that on the bottom, I can tell you after what it is. But I basically had two cassette tapes. So one was the Black Crowes and one was the Indigo Girls. That's all I listened to for 2 months. But I took a 29-hour bus ride down to Los Angeles, got off the bus with just that stuff in tow, and to celebrate, I went to see a movie. And I realized that this is probably before all of you or most of you were born. But that was the movie that I saw in celebration of arriving in Los Angeles. Although my focus was initially on writing for television or features, after some time and some tremendous effort, I found myself on the path of being an executive, essentially working with writers and working with scripts, and I'll go into that in more detail in a bit. Basically I was reading scripts and identifying the good ones, working with writers to get material ready to make into a movie, and then overseeing the movie if it got made. So now it's 22 years later, and I have a beautiful wife and two kids. And these are some of the movies that I have worked on over the years. As you can see, a pretty wide range of movies. That is mostly by design, because I love all different kinds of movies. I'm really passionate about film overall, and I love all different genres. I want to be involved with great movies that set the bar high, and I'll let you decide which ones hit the bar and which ones didn't. And I won't let on what my opinions are on them. You know, it was and it continues to be a ton of work, especially now that I'm an independent producer and the entertainment industry has changed so vastly, which I'll get into in a little bit. But what I tell my kids when it comes up about what they want to do when they grow up is that my hope is that you can find, this is me talking to them, you can find something you love to do as much as I love what I do. There's just nothing quite like seeing a movie in a theater that you've worked on, and I'll tell a little anecdote. American Pie was when my second executive job, and the script came in from a manager, and I'm going to give you context in a bit for all of these terms, but script came in from a manager. He pretended like he was giving it only to me, when in reality he was giving it to 10 other people to read, which is kind of how Hollywood works. And I read the script, and I wish I still had the copy of that script, because as graphic as the movie was, this script was unbelievably graphic. And I called him and I said, "This is hilarious, but you can't do this, you can't do that." He's like, yeah, I know, we're going to be cutting it, you know. So I went to my boss and I said, "There's this script I read over the weekend, and they're going to lock the script and go out with it on Friday, and I think you should cancel your lunch." And you know, this is a story of just sort of that I learned a lot from, about going with my gut and my instincts. And I found myself in several offices, mostly with women, questioning, like, this is pretty raunchy, and do you think people are going to connect with this? And I just kind of stood my ground and said, yes, I think so. And I want to say probably about a year and a half later, I was in a proper movie theater paying to see some movie, and the trailer came up. And to see those moments on screen and hear people react to those moments that I reacted to in my crappy little single apartment on Blackburn Avenue was just such a tremendous feeling, and you know, vindication and like all that stuff. But you know, it's really just a wonderful feeling. So before I give you the long and winding path to where I am now, I think it'd be good to give you a basic overview of the business, because it's my experience that people who are just starting out, and I'm mentoring a few people in Los Angeles who are just starting out in the business, they may know a lot about movies from going to film school and such, but they might not know a lot about how the business works. And you know, my goal for you, if there's one thing you take away from this talk, it should be that you understand that this is a business. And now more than ever, with the economy being what it is, with the industry going through sort of tectonic shifts, that's something absolutely to keep in mind. And I was going to make that point, I was going to wear a tie, but my wife said, don't wear a tie. So it's probably helpful to look at the movie business, and this is a huge oversimplification, but I think it would be good to start simple, and then there are layers of complexity on that. But to break the movie business, and we're talking about movie business, not television business, that's a whole other thing, in 4 quadrants. So this is the basics. One quadrant, you have the talent, quote unquote, which include writers, directors, and actors. Another quadrant, you have representation, agents and managers who represent the talent. Next quadrant, you have producers, which is where I am now, and I'll go into that a little bit later. And then the last quadrant is financiers, which are studios, or what are called distributors, you know, 20th Century Fox, Universal Pictures, Warner Brothers, Disney, on down the line, to independent financiers. There have been a good handful of independent financiers who have really kind of risen up the ranks over the last few years. And to get a basic sense of how it works, I'm going to do some funky little arrows here. So let's use an example of a writer writes a script. And let's assume that writer has an agent or a manager. He or she will send it to the agent manager, let's say agent. The agent reads it and says, you know, I think we can sell this. He or she will most likely send it to producers. But whereas it's different now than it was in the 90s. In the 90s, it happened a lot faster. And the agent would sometimes just send it straight into a financier or send it to producers overnight, and the producers would all compete to be able to send it to financiers, and the script just by itself would sell. Not in every case, but in more cases. Now it's slowed down a little bit, and I think that's a good slowdown. I think it's a correction in the market, if you will. But the agencies and management companies, especially the agencies, will sometimes hang on to a script and package the script. So they will say, this is why agencies like CAA, WME, UTA, the bigger agencies, are very powerful in Hollywood because they represent writers, directors, and actors. So packaging is a term they use to say, okay, we've got a script, let's go out to a director who's a client, let's see if we can put some actors on it, and then we will package it, and then go to producers or financiers. So the basic idea is that it'll go to producers, and then the producers will vie to send it in to the studios or the independent financiers. Those are also called buyers because they have the ability to buy a script. And if a financier buys your script, you're psyched. But it is by no means guaranteed that the movie will get made. There's something called development hell, which you should be so lucky to be in, because that means that you have sold a script, which is excellent. Looking at these quadrants, I'll give you my work experience. Try to be as concise as possible. So my first job was at International Creative Management, called ICM, which is one of the bigger agencies. They've actually now merged with a smaller agency, so they're called ICM Partners. If you are wondering how to get your start in the business or where to go, where to look first, that's where I would suggest you go. It's sort of the industry version of a liberal arts education. You get kind of a broad-based view of how the business works because, case in point, the sort of arrows that I had done a minute ago, you're dealing with talent, you're dealing with producers, you're dealing with financiers. So that's a really good sort of nexus point to work from. Of course, the hours are horrific and the pay is even worse, but it is a good springboard. Also, you will meet people who are very much like you and want to move up in the business, and you will move up and move on together. So, it's going on 20 years now, and there's a network of people out there in Hollywood who I was assistants with at ICM, and we'll sort of always have that bond. From there, I went to work for a producer by the name of John Peters, and I'll skip real quick. I realized that I was only going to be working on the development of scripts, and not, if something went into production, I wouldn't be involved in the production of it. And I wanted to continue to learn, and that's been a theme for me over the course of my career, is keep learning, keep absorbing, just learn everything that you possibly can. So just through some personal connections and some luck, I went over to Universal Pictures, one of the major studios, and that's where I had my American Pie experience. And so I was able to work on projects in script form, but then also, for instance, when American Pie went into production, I was helping to oversee the production, and that was a whole new world that I was excited to be a part of, and daunted, but excited as well. From there, I wanted to learn, how do I put this? I felt a little bit detached from the creative process at the studio. At the studio, what you're doing is you're basically overseeing, it's almost like and this is not derogatory at all, but you're basically overseeing an investment. It's almost like you're the bank, and I wanted to learn how a movie works from the ground up. And so I went to work, the guy who was running Universal at the time left Universal and segued into a producing deal with Universal. So I went to him and I said, look, I'd like to help you produce the movies that you make. And he said, okay. And so over the course of 4 years, I helped him develop, among others, Hidalgo and Ladder 49. So worked on those from when, Hidalgo, for instance, this guy John Fusco, we had worked with him on a previous project that did not go to production. But we said, look, we want to do something else with you. What do you have? And he sent us a memo, a list of ideas, and one was, something about the Ocean Fire horse race. And we went, that sounds like a movie. That sounds like a Disney movie. And so worked on it from when it was a concept through outline, script, many drafts, 50, 60, 70 drafts. And it was really my job to work very closely with the writer and provide him with analysis, critiques, ideas, etc. And then when the movie went into production, which was it became a Disney movie, I was on set. I was on location, which is really what I wanted to learn to do in the first place. So I was ecstatic. When my wife came with me, we were in Morocco for 8 long weeks. Ladder 49 was a similar situation. It was an article that I read that this was way before 9/11, dealt with the community of firefighters, and I just thought it was an incredible world to explore. We found a writer. The writer basically came up with a take, with a story, and worked with him on script after script, draft after draft. We spent about 6 or 8 months in Baltimore, and that's where my wife got pregnant with Oliver back there. And again, on location for that, so I really learned how to produce a movie. Casey's deal with Universal was up after 4 years. Marjorie was about to give birth to Oliver. I took a little bit of time off, and then I decided I wanted to, now that I had the producing experience on the floor, on location, etc., I wanted to go back to working for a financier, because the financiers are the ones who write the checks, who say yes or no as to whether they're going to make a movie or not. And that's where I wanted to go. And right about that time, Jeff Skoll, who was one of the founders of eBay, had decided he wanted to start a company that made socially relevant films. And so I was there for about 3-4 years. I loved the movies that I worked on there and the filmmakers I worked with. It was great to be at a place that I felt had its heart in the right place, and believed that one could make movies that are about something, but that could also do well at the box office. We didn't quite do as well on the latter part of it, but we're very proud of those movies. So from there, I got a call from a friend who had taken over a new division at Paramount Pictures, which is one of the major distributors. And he said, look, MTV, Nickelodeon, I just started this new division. Would you want to come over here? And I thought to myself, this is really interesting. I'll be going from a financier of movies to a giant company that is not only financing movies, but is marketing them and distributing them. So the whole movie mechanism in one place, essentially. And that's the advantage of being at what's called a studio or a distributor. But as sometimes happens in Hollywood, that didn't last very long. There was a lot of dysfunction at the studio. But by then I was at a level where I had a contract, so that helped allay the sting. But right about then I started talking to my best friend, who I grew up with. We've known each other since the 7th grade. And in fact, it was spurred by my wife, Marjorie, who said, look, you and Dan have been talking about starting Katona Pictures for years. Why not do it now? We kind of looked at each other and realized maybe it wasn't the perfect time, but we realized it was never going to be the perfect time. And we sort of went off. He's got a lot of stuff going right now. He's got a lot of different businesses. So really, it's me. It's what I do day in and day out is for this company. So it is a fight and a struggle, and everything you would imagine being an independent producer, especially now, as I said, the economy is what it is. So I know the question was, what do I do on a daily basis? Here's some ideas: read, make phone calls, read scripts, books, articles, stories, etc. I figured I'd use a couple of examples. I think that would be a better illustration than just bullet points. My partner, Dan, to his credit, when we started the company, he said, I'd been asking around friends if there were any stories that they had heard recently that they think would make good movies. And somebody mentioned this woman, Sarah Weddington. She wrote a book called Question of Choice. And he said, I haven't read it yet, but it sounds interesting. And so the story was, and is, that this woman was the lead lawyer on the pro-choice side of Roe versus Wade. Some of you might be familiar with the story. Most people I talk to are not. And it's sort of fascinating to me that it's sort of the story behind the story of Roe versus Wade. She was 24 years old when she took on the case. She couldn't find a job. She was doing volunteer work for the women's rights movement, basically in Austin. And they approached her and said, we want to take on the anti-abortion law in Texas. And she said, you need to find somebody else. I've done like 2 divorces, and both of them were amicable, and I've never been to court before. And they said, well, you're the only female practicing attorney we know, and we feel that's important, and the only one we know who will do it for free. And she took it on, she worked out of her house, and by age 26, and the arc of the story that I love is it started out as a job that nobody wanted, and then it became a job that everybody wanted, because once they got to the Supreme Court. So this woman at age 26 was arguing in front of the Supreme Court, and as you know, she won, and she remains the youngest person to ever argue in front of the Supreme Court. So we, again, this is daily basis kind of thing. I read the book, I said, I think this is a movie. I'm not sure what its home would be, if it's going to be a major studio movie, or maybe it's a cable movie, maybe it's HBO. That's going to depend on the talent, who wants to play, for instance, Sarah Weddington. If it's Natalie Portman, that's a feature. If it's somebody else, that's a cable movie, and that's not a bad thing. But we felt like it was a really interesting story. So, my job as a producer was, thank God for social media, track her down, try to find her. I sent her an email, didn't hear back, then tried a few months later, and that's a thing you have to learn in Hollywood, especially as a producer. Just keep at it, just don't ever give up. And eventually we tracked her down. Months and months went by, and we negotiated a deal, so we optioned her life rights. And then we announced it on this website called Deadline Hollywood, deadline.com, which if you're interested in the movie business and sort of the inner workings of it, I suggest you check it out, and even look at it every day, depending on your level of interest. So now we have a writer. She's finishing up a rewrite on something. She's going to start on our script, hopefully in March. So that's an example of what I would do on a daily basis. Another example, quickly, is where Gone came from, which was a movie starring Amanda Seyfried that came out last spring. That was an idea, and I pitched an idea to a writer, a man named Allison Burnett, and he said, I don't see, it doesn't feel commercial to me. I'm not sure what the hook is. So I spent the afternoon watching trailers on iTunes, on the Apple.com website, and I called him back and I said, look, Silence of the Lambs, the girl who was held in the pit, she escaped at the end, or was freed at the end, but what the F happened to her? What if you made a sequel to Silence of the Lambs, what would her character be like? And we both felt like that was an interesting jumping off point for a character. And he decided to go off and write the script, what's called on spec, which is for free, because he felt like he could then sell it for more money than if he tried to go and pitch it verbally and get hired. And so that all happened really, really fast. It never happens that fast, but this one did. It got put together really quickly. I think the movie turned out between us, okay, not great, but that's what happens sometimes. It's a ride, and you only have so much control over the process, because the movie is like an aircraft carrier, you know. So now. I do want to point out one thing. If what I do on a daily basis sounds awesomely creative and freeing and exactly like what you think you could do with your life, it is. It absolutely is. It's a lot of fun. But keep in mind that actually getting a movie made is incredibly challenging and also highly unlikely. So what I try to keep in mind is I use all kinds of sports analogies, and the one I use the most is baseball. If I'm in the major leagues, I could fail 7 times out of 10. That means I've gotten 3 hits. But if I do that over the course of a career, I'll be most likely a Hall of Famer. So it's a good way to look at the movie business. You get dinged, you get rejected, you get, you know, all kinds of things, but you just have to keep going. You have to, you know, take it every day and go with your gut and go with what you're passionate about. So I thought, if it's okay with you guys, how are we doing on time? We're okay? Okay, so just give me the thing, because I haven't rehearsed this. So I thought that it would be interesting, because as I said to you, it's a business now more than ever. And I thought it might be interesting to look at the box office of 2 years as a way of comparing and looking at how much the business has changed or where it hasn't. So analyzing box office has always been a bit of a blood sport in the movie business. And now more than ever in the digital age with social media and stuff, everybody has access to the same things. The numbers come out flying out. And it really is a widespread sort of debate. When thinking about box office specifically, and also the movie business in general, I think it's important to think about 2 things, or 2 slogans, I should say. So you might have heard this phrase, but it was coined by William Goldman, who's wrote some of the greatest movies ever. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Princess Bride. He wrote a book that I believe was published in '82 called Adventures in the Screen Trade. And it's really dated now. I don't know that I'd recommend you take your precious time and read that, but it is very, very salient for its time. And basically, what for me this works on so many different levels. It's both a pro and a con. It's a con in the sense that, well, nobody knows anything, so what's the point? But it also helps to sort of keep me going, because I go, well, if nobody knows anything, then I'm just going to keep going with this project, and eventually it'll stick. So it also addresses the fact that it's driven many, many investors out of the movie business because it's so unpredictable and there's so many different factors, and that it is a creative business, and creative can often mean arbitrary. All of the movies you see, you go out to the theater to see, or you watch on iTunes or whatever, represent a lot of people in the business trying to figure out what the audience wants. And so that leads me to the next slogan. I'll defend, or at least try to shed some light on many of the decisions that are made in the entertainment business. I don't have a ton of patience. I understand it, but I don't have a ton of patience for people who are not in the business, who are sort of decrying the quality of movies and the decisions that are made and how the heck do these movies get made. And in fact, my wife sometimes asks me these questions, and I have to, just sort of explain, well, being in a room at a studio where a studio had said Harry Potter had come out and done tremendously well, and he said, "Where's my Harry Potter?" And I thought, well, first of all, it's not yours, it's the audience's. I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. And second of all, if we're looking for Harry Potter, we're going to miss the next big thing. And that's been a mindset that has served me well. I use the American Pie example. I knew that, or at least I thought, that we hadn't seen a movie like that in a long time. And that was when I stood in the Stacey Snider's office, sort of shaking in my boots, and her questioning me about it. I said, look, from a business standpoint, we have not seen this graphic look at teenage sexuality since Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and everything is cyclical. So we could be the first. Everybody's making Can't Hardly Wait and all these sort of soft teen movies, and those are fine, but this is going to bust out of the gates. And then, I have friends now who get on my case and say, you're the one who started it. Like that now, like for years after that, I had to read every R-rated teen comedy under the sun. So that's sort of how the business works. And I can't necessarily defend that, but I at least want to, like I said, have you understand that it comes from a place of, trying to figure it out. So nobody ever sets out to make a crappy movie. The fact is that there are crappy movies made in every era. I just want everybody to sort of understand that and think about that. It's just that as time goes by, we sort of delete out the crap and remember the great stuff. And as I was writing this, I was thinking, God, if only we did that in our lives. But so for me, I remember the 80s as this wonderful time of E.T., Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Breakfast Club, Terms of Endearment, Nightmare on Elm Street, which is truly a great movie, the first one, not the other 17. And I edit out things like Crush Groove, Throw Mama from the Train, Deadly Friend, Silent Night, Deadly Night. Now, I have to say this about Silent Night, Deadly Night. This is the most awful horror movie ever made, and I will never forget the video cassette box, which is... The movie was like a monster dressed as Santa or something, so it was like a Santa sleeve with this sort of creepy alien thing ringing a doorbell, but it inadvertently looked like the Grinch. And then the slogan was, "'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring because they were all dead." I'll never forget that. So that's a great bad movie. So the fact is that everything is connected, and this is a whole other hours and hours and hours long talk. But no trend comes out of nowhere, and as I said, it all comes back to us trying to figure out what the audience wants. So with that in mind, let's look at 2 years of box office. One is 1990, when I first came out to Hollywood, and one is 2012, okay? And talk a little bit about, how are we, Blair? Are we okay?
7 minutes.
7 minutes, oh my God, okay. So this is a little game that I like to play. It's sort of called, Would This Be Made Today? So if you take a look at these, I think it's kind of interesting because it addresses how our business has changed. So I was going to sort of solicit feedback and all that stuff, but I don't think we have time. So I'll go through this quickly.
No, you can take that, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll give you my thoughts and you guys can jump in or whatever. But Home Alone, what do you think? Do you think it would be made as a movie, as a feature? I know somebody in here who loves that movie. It actually holds up. It's a blast.
Not like the 7.
Not the remake.
No, yeah. But here's what I would say. I mean, I guess it was, and it's so silly. It's sort of like with sports saying, would LeBron beat Michael Jordan? Like you can just never know, and it's never like apples to apples. But my instinct, it was so well executed that I think it could be made today. But it also feels like an area that's now being covered by television. you could see it, you could imagine it being on the Disney Channel or Nickelodeon. And that's something that I think about a lot, because the struggle is to figure out, movies are so damn expensive now. The struggle is to figure out how to get people into the theater, to pay their hard-earned money, to get up off the couch, to get away from Netflix and their iPads and stuff like that. And there's so much more competition for people's attention now. So that's something that I think about a lot. And that fits into here. I think Ghost is a similar thing. If it got made, maybe it's on a cable network. Dances with Wolves, I also think is cable. I mean, you think about Costner on Hatfields and McCoys, the miniseries. I mean, this feels like something that the History Channel is doing now. Pretty Woman, what do you think?
Yes.
You think so? You know, it's a movie star movie, so perhaps. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is, well, watch yourselves, because Paramount is making Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So Michael Bay, who did Transformers, is producing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Nickelodeon, which is part of Paramount, bought the property for tens of millions of dollars, and they're doing it. So that's part of what that part of the movie making has to do with brand recognition, and we'll see that in the next slide. Hunt for Red October, just real quick. You know, I saw that in the series that didn't last very long, TV series, The Last Resort. That felt to me like something that was done on television in an episodic format. And that's also really interesting to me. I think there's a golden age of television going on right now, and it's fascinating to me to watch how television has taken some of the conventions of the movies and applied them to the episodic format. I think something like The Killing is a good example of that. Total Recall was remade a few last year. Didn't do very well, which frankly doesn't surprise me. The next Die Hard's coming out this summer. He's got a lot less hair, and as do I. But that's a big-time franchise that has continued to do well for Fox. Dick Tracy, I don't think so. I don't think that gets made. Kindergarten Cop, a great bad movie. I don't think so. This falls into, I think, Disney Channel and Nickelodeon. Although I will always love that line. It's not a tumor. Okay, so also keep in mind this is just domestic, and this is adjusted. If you want to adjust for 2013, you add approximately 54%. So Home Alone would have made over 500 million. I think it was $526 million. A really good resource for this is boxofficemojo.com. You can do all kinds of analysis and comparisons and stuff like that. So here's what's really interesting to me. We'll go from one slide to the next. Okay, so here we are. All right, so this was 2012. First of all, I want to say I freaking loved The Avengers. I thought it was awesome. I mean, I was a comic book kid, and Ollie's pumping his fist. I think it's a great example of a great movie, just a really well done movie that was wildly entertaining. I did not see The Dark Knight Rises, but I know it's so highly regarded. I think it's another example of, thank God for Chris Nolan, who can bring incredible filmmaking to a comic book property. So here's what was interesting for me. This was a good learning experience. How many sequels do you think were in 1990, in the top 10 box office for 1990? Okay, it was 3. How many sequels are up here? I think it's 7. Right. Well, give or take. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to count this as a sequel. 4, 5, 6, 7. So I thought that was very, very telling about how much the business has changed. And again, it goes to what do the audiences want? The studios are now part of larger corporations that are publicly traded. They have to be able to show profit. They have to be able to show a certain degree of certainty in a business that is not built on certainty. So how do they find that certainty? They find these properties, these franchises that they can build on that have not only value, I mean, look at how much money this made, and this was just domestic, but also ancillary value, spin-off potential, all different kinds of things. And then, you know, Chris Nolan is now doing the rebooting Superman. The Hunger Games, even though it's not a sequel, it's generating, you know, many sequels to come. Ted, I haven't heard anything specifically, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did a sequel to that. And, you know, something that's interesting to keep in mind with this is that this doesn't take into account, first of all, international box office, which has been growing really rapidly over the last few years. So that represents somewhere between 60 and 70% of overall box office revenue. So that's a big deal. And it also doesn't take into account the cost of the movie. So it's interesting to look at these movies and to think about which one might be the most profitable. And that's you know, that's something you can't really figure out. But it's interesting to think about an eyeball. One thing that comes to mind is this movie was made for, I want to say 55 or 60 million. So not nearly the probably 200 million that the Avengers was made for. Of course, it doesn't create the ancillary value that Avengers does for Disney, but you know, it's extremely profitable. And I really enjoyed it. The kids still want to see it, but we were like, no, it's R-rated. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. Okay, so a few final words, I'm sorry.
No, you're right on time.
Okay, so the entertainment business is a great business to be in, but it's a lot of work and a lot of heartache. And you have to love what you do and hold on to that love just ferociously. And not because you, and this is really key, I think, not because you love the glitz and the glamour, because there's not enough of that to keep you going, but because you love it. And by it, I mean that feeling that you have when the lights go down or you're curled up with your iPad and a movie takes you somewhere else. And you walk out of the movie, if it was good, with this kind of natural high that lasts for a few hours. And I gotta say, I had that with this. I was like a little kid, and I'm having so much fun with my kids experiencing movies through their eyes. And also conveying how lucky they are. You know, I had Oliver watch the Hulk TV series with Lou Ferrigno in green makeup. And when you look at that compared to the effects nowadays, it's just, it's mind-blowing. So, you know, you walk out of the movie and it had this natural high that lasts for a few hours, and it reinvigorates you every time you think of that movie. And you could watch that movie over and over because of that feeling. When I was 9 years old, my dad took me to see Star Wars. He said that I did not blink for the entire 2 hours. And I've told myself that I always want to be that wide-eyed kid in the movie theater, and I still am, so I think the industry's stuck with me. And I really don't know what else I would do anyway. But I will say this, it's daunting, but we need you desperately. We need fresh new voices and eyes and ears and people who look at entertainment differently than we do. The fact is that we can learn from you. You've grown up in a different world than we have. You're digital natives and we're just trying to adapt. So if you have that burning desire, you know, come join us. We'll be better for it, and hopefully you will too. And I will say this before we take questions. I'm speaking of adapting or adopting. I just went on Twitter. I've been on LinkedIn for a while, and I'm playing around with Google+. But if it's helpful for you, what I started doing with LinkedIn a few months ago was just another thing that I do on a daily basis is read trade articles and not just entertainment articles, but articles about technology and business and stuff. And I will aggregate them on my LinkedIn account and now on Twitter. So if you're at all interested, if you want to reach out to me on either of those platforms, and Google+, like I said, I'm just sort of starting, feel free to do that. And I do it for myself anyway, so I'm happy to share those pieces that I think are interesting. It's less about specific deals than it is about kind of the shape of the business and the movement of the industry and where I think it's all going. So that's that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to start question and answer. So we're going to do about 10 minutes if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely.
So if any of you guys have any questions, now's the time before you do connect on Twitter. And yeah.
Do you see yourself financing YouTube projects in the future?
Yes. That's a bigger question about financing. I'm not a financier right now. I'm an independent producer. So
Producing.
yeah, yes, absolutely, absolutely. That's something that I'm absolutely interested in and want to get into. So, anybody else?
What would producing YouTube videos entail? Like, why?
It all depends on the content and the material. If I don't want to do it just to do it. I would want to find material that I felt was well suited for it. And again, thinking about what the audience wants. Is this the kind of thing I would think that a comedy might be more suited to somebody sitting at their computer or watching on the television, that kind of thing. So it would just be a matter of anything I read, I kind of think, what's the format? What's the format that best serves this material? So. Yes?
You mentioned you were first inspired to go into the entertainment industry when you were watching TV.
Yeah.
Have you ever considered going into TV, or would you ever want to produce for TV, or are you stuck with that?
Oh, absolutely. No, that's my, my wife and I, as I'm learning keynote here, I did a 2013, sort of prospectus for myself, and television is a big part of it. So absolutely. I think it's where some of the best stories are being told, and I think you can see from my background, especially the participant stuff like Syriana, Good Night and Good Luck, those are character-driven movies, writer-driven movies, and I think that's where TV series, frankly, I think television is doing a better job than the movies. But I will say, every time when I go see something like Argo, that I think is a phenomenal movie, and thank God people, drove it past $100 million in box office, I'm really heartened. But the short answer is absolutely yes. Yeah.
What did you study before, and what kind of prerequisites would someone need to start in engineering?
That's actually a really good question. I studied English, English and American literature and language. So I always loved reading. I loved writing. I loved storytelling. I think that the most important thing that you can have is the ability to analyze a story, what's working for you, what's not working for you, and articulate that, because no matter what, every level of the business, you're going to be required to do that. And that's frankly what propelled me, got me, promoted, or got me to move up in the business, was my ability to go, you should pay attention to this, and then the script sells for $500,000 to somebody else. But, then all of a sudden, have Chris read it, and then I started writing coverage, which is, a summary of a script and then a page of comments, which I think you could probably Google and find coverage format. And then I started writing notes, which is the bane of a lot of writers' existence. But notes basically are a written document that addresses some of the concerns about the current draft, and basically saying, okay, for this next draft, let's deal with these areas. And so in every case, the ability to read a story, analyze it, figure out what's working, what's not working, and articulate yourself, I think, is incredibly important. What I say to people at the most basic notion of what I do is, I say, how you go to a movie and something's just not quite working and you can't figure out what it is? And they say, yeah. And I say, it's my job to figure that out before you see the movie. That's really what it boils down to. Anybody else?
Any other questions?
Yes.
What kinds of material is your production company looking into making?
That's a good question too. We like to say genre agnostic. We want to try to set the bar as high as possible. Gone notwithstanding. Doesn't always work, but we look at I look at movies that are both well executed and make great money as inspiration. So Argo is one, but also something like District 9 that came out a few years ago. It's a sci-fi movie that is so well done. Inception, those kinds of movies I'm really drawn to. I don't know that I would do sort of, mindless entertainment or whatever. I won't use any specifics, but I'm always going to try to make the best movie possible. But as you can see from the movies I worked on, I look at all different kinds of movies and sizes of movies. Although, unfortunately for me, the scripts that I tend to respond to the most strongly are the ones that are so tiny and that they have trouble getting made. But anyway. Yes?
What would you consider your most successful project?
Oh, God. Well, I guess it depends on what the criteria.
For you, like you personally.
Well, I'm going to answer one and then I'm going to answer another because I know my wife is going to tell me to answer the same one. I would say the most successful, I would say, is American Pie, just from the number of people who went to see it. The fact that it made over $100 million domestic and over $100 million internationally. It was made for $11 million, so it was unbelievably profitable. Spawned too many sequels, but I would say, sort of financially speaking, that was the most successful. I would say I'm proud. I'm really fortunate. I'm proud of a lot of the movies that I worked on, American Pie included. I would say the movie that I love the most, if you put a gun to my head, is The Visitor, which is my wife's favorite of the movies that I worked on. So I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of Good Night and Good Luck and Syriana. Those movies really fill me with pride. On that level, I think they were successful. Anybody else? Oh, yes.
If you did move towards the social media platform, how would you profit off of that? Because I know that most shows go on to such TV stations.
Yeah.
Or movies.
Well, that's a really good question, and that's a whole other talk about disruption, and different media platforms. What I didn't address was the financiers there are different financiers now. Amazon is getting into the financing business. Netflix is now making major television series. So those things are opening up. I think you ask a really good question that people are pulling their hair out trying to figure out now. I think it's getting more realistic to think that one can make money on those platforms. I look at some of the acquisitions coming out of Sundance this year. Last year there were some movies that did really well on iTunes. One movie, Arbitrage, with Richard Gere, was extremely profitable. They released it in theaters and on iTunes at the same time, and it was a bit of an experiment, but it ended up doing really well. So I think that's a harbinger of things to come, and so I think that it will get more profitable as time goes on. But right now, at this moment, it's difficult to tell. It's difficult to figure out, but it can be done.
We have one last question.
Maybe you can speak to maybe like your worst day working and then your best day working, just so we can kind of see the range of emotions and experiences.
Sure. Oh my God. Okay. The worst. Well, I've had a lot of worst days, but I remember just because it's not that far removed from where you guys are probably going to be at some point soon. It was my first job. My first job at ICM. I had gotten the job because the woman I sat down with had just been made agent. She said, "I want somebody with no experience and no preconceptions about the business." And I was like, I'm your man. And so then I had to, and this could actually be an interesting segue to something that I want to bring up, but so I had to learn the hard way, and I made tons of mistakes. Probably the worst mistake that I ever made was a guy, I'm not going to remember his name, but this guy, Danny Rubin, had written Groundhog Day, which is also a great movie and also really did well financially. But so he was very hot, and he was a big ICM client at the time, and my boss was a junior agent, was covering the studio. So the studios sometimes have open writing assignments that they're looking to fill, and she thought that Danny Rubin would be really good for a particular writing assignment, and she called the studio, and they said, "Oh, that would be fantastic, Danny Rubin." And so she called Danny Rubin and said, "You know, I'm going to make this up, but The House. You know, here's the project. It's called The House." And he's like, "That sounds pretty good." And so, all excited, she said, "Send Danny Rubin The House." So I called. This was before, computers, yes, but not everything was online. I called down to the library. I said, "I'd like a copy of The House." They sent it up to me. I sent it out to Danny Rubin. We set up the conference call. It happens between the writer, Danny, and the studio, and we're sort of sitting by the phone waiting to see how it went. And my boss got the call from the studio, and she said, "How did it go? How did it go?" And the person said, "Well, we started talking about, we brought up the project, and Danny said, 'We love your project so much,' and Danny said, 'I love your project so much, I think it's great,' and he started telling us ideas on how he would fix it, and we realized he wasn't talking about our project." So it turns out that I had sent a completely different project called The House to Danny Rubin, and I mean, it was just a disaster, and if I worked for many other people in Hollywood, I probably would have gotten a stapler thrown at my head. But she was incredibly decent and didn't fire me, and she should have, probably. So that was the worst. The best, I gotta say, was probably, I don't know, you know, a couple things come to mind is, you know, when we bought American Pie on my recommendation, and then another one was when a participant, when the Academy Award nominations came out, and we had, I think, 9 nominations in 1 year. That was a proud moment.
Awesome.
Yeah. So.
Thank you so much. Yeah, let's give Chris another round. Thank you so much. We're going to do a couple of quick announcements, and then we'll have people you'll have time to approach Chris after. I'm going to have Ellen come up and give a couple of announcements. We're doing an event tomorrow, a couple things, and then again on Sunday.
Alrighty. So notes here. So the